Welcome to the Week in Politics with Michelle Grattan. My name's Nick Klomp. I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor here at the University of Canberra. Hi Michelle.
Hello Nick.
The Coalition Party has had vigorous discussions this week about the Finkel review on Australia's energy issues. MPs sounded pretty negative, but was it all bad for Malcolm Turnbull?
I don't think it was as bad as the initial reports. Obviously the opponents of the Finkel plan got out there first with their briefings. They were very negative briefings about what had happened at the Coalition Party's meeting. But I think that when a broader picture was seen, it became obvious that people had quite a few questions and doubts about the scheme, but there was also, apart from the hardcore opposition, there were also many people who were really just wanting to know more, wanting to be reassured that the affordability issue, energy affordability, which is really coming back to them in their electorates, would be adequately addressed. So it does seem to me that out of this meeting, Malcolm Turnbull has the basis on which to get a clean energy target, but it'll have to be a scheme that has some differences from what's proposed by the Finkel committee, and also, and particularly, the question of coal and the role of so-called cleaner coal will be quite essential.
3 federal ministers have been hauled before a Victorian court for criticising terror sentencing. Is this a freedom of speech issue?
This is quite unusual that the judiciary would take this attitude when it came under some fire. The criticisms essentially were suggesting that the judiciary was being too soft on people convicted of terrorist-related crimes, that it was taking an ideological attitude, and there needed to be a much tougher regime. But I think it is a freedom of speech issue. The ministers were unwise to make strong comments when a case was ongoing, and you could also argue, I think, that the ministers who were not in the area of security-related issues maybe would have done better to stick to their own portfolio questions. But nevertheless, I think that it's important that the judiciary is not above criticism, and to have this bite back is, I think, an overreaction.
Immigration Minister Peter Dutton is introducing changes to citizenship laws, including tougher English language testing and more stringent testing on values. There's also a new power for the minister to override administrative decisions on citizenship overall. Is this all going too far?
It's a question of judgment. I think that people generally would think that new citizens obviously should sign up to Australian values, but really the commitment to values is in people's actions and attitudes. It's hard to capture that in any test. Tests can be gamed, can't they? But the English requirements, I think, are quite controversial in the sense that a fairly high standard will be required, and it's certainly true that it's desirable that people do speak English well, that this is going to help them in terms of getting jobs, in terms of general integration and all those things. But on the other hand, the language skills can be quite difficult to acquire to a high standard for some people, and we have many citizens who don't speak very good English but are first-rate Australians. So I think that there probably more flexibility is desirable.
Meanwhile, a speech by Malcolm Turnbull parodying the US President Donald Trump at an off-the-record press gallery ball, I understand, has been shared online. Considering some people's arguments that politicians need to be more human, isn't it good that this is out there?
Well, I won't go into the details of the speeches. I was there at the off-the-record occasion, but it was a very good speech, a very funny speech. These occasions, it might sound pretty bizarre to most people that anyone would think they're off the record, because there are nearly 1,000 people there. There are lobbyists, there are all sorts of people from companies, from way out of Canberra. So it does sound odd. But nevertheless, those are the rules often contested among journalists. The fact, however, that this speech has got out and given its flavour, basically a riff on himself, a riff on the president, one would say, without going into the full details. But the fact that it's got out, I think, is an embarrassment, because not sure how much of a sense of humour Donald Trump has. And it's been compared to the Washington riffs that happen at similar occasions, but I guess the difference is that those riffs are usually on domestic politicians. I'm not sure whether that's invariably the case, but that's usually the case. And when you're talking about a prickly character like Donald Trump, in the early stages of the relationship and after that phone call, then you're treading in rather delicate territory.
Interesting. The government school funding package based on Gonski will be voted on in the Senate this coming week. Do you think the government will get this through?
Well, I think it's important it does, because it does get to a much more needs-based system, more to the original Gonski than what we've got at the moment. The government did think that it might be able to do a deal with the Greens. As things look at the moment, that doesn't seem the most likely thing. Now, of course, it's very difficult to predict, so I would put in a qualifier, but the Greens have been divided. They did hear from Gonski this week, but they also heard from the Teachers' Union. Teachers' Union's very against the government package. So the government is starting to look to the other non-Green crossbenchers and put together the numbers there. A bit too early to say how it would go, but I think it's got a reasonable chance of bringing together that deal, and that'll be an important win if that chance proves right and the legislation's achieved.
Important and interesting week coming up.
The last week also before the winter recess, and so there's a lot of things piled into that week. It's going to be a difficult week for the government, a very challenging one.
Michelle Grattan, thank you again.
Thanks, Nick.